In this problem, we have a data file that shows the annual returns expressed in percentages for a tech mutual fund and an energy mutual fund over the past 37 years. We have a partner at our investing firm that believes that some of these returns might be outliers. They've asked a junior data analyst, which we can assume is us, to determine if there are outliers present using these two different methods. They want to use the box and whisker method. We'll see if the Excel automatic thing returns any outliers in that. And then, to be a little more thorough, we're also going to use the z-score method, where anything that's more than 3 standard deviations below or above the mean average is going to be considered an outlier. So to do this, let's start with a box and whisker because it's easy. I'm just going to highlight all of column B and C, including the headers. I want to go up to insert. I am going to go to the statistics chart section of this and pick my box and whisker. If I wanted to, I could make this all fancy and everything, but I am going to go and add the legend really fast in chart elements just so I don't get confused on which fund is which. The dots represent outliers. So it's looking from what Excel automatically spit out at us. The technology fund has an outlier on the high side, while the energy fund has an outlier on the low side. Let's be a little more thorough in here and also use the z-score methodology for determining outliers. And to do so, we're going to need the mean and the standard deviation. I'm going to grab the minimum return and maximum return for each respective fund just so I can check those numbers, because that's what your outlier is most likely going to be, is the min or the max. And then we'll calculate our z-scores. So for the mean of the tech fund, that's going to be with the average function. So equals average, if I could spell it correctly, open a parenthesis, and I'm going to highlight all of the information, not the header, given for the tech fund. Cells B2 to B38. And when I do, it tells me that the mean average of the tech fund is 17.7% per year. I want the same thing for the energy fund. I am going to just use the fill handle, because what's the average of the energy fund going to be? It's going to be the average of everything in C2 down to C38. And if I just click the fill handle and pull over to the energy fund, that's exactly what formula it makes real fast. So now we can see that the mean average of the energy fund was 10.03%, much lower than the tech fund. What about the standard deviation? Well, this is just a sample of 37 years for two funds, so I want the standard deviation of a sample formula, which is the standard dev.s. So I'm going to say equal stdev.s. Click that to put this up in here, open a parenthesis, is even better. Let's highlight all of the numbers for the tech fund in that range, so B2 to B38 again. Hit enter, and I'm going to fill handle, or not fill in, I'm going to drag with the fill handle on over. Standard deviation of the energy fund is 22.95. So while the return on the tech fund seems to be greater on average, there is also a higher level of variance. What's the minimum return that the tech fund had during the period? That's going to be the min function, so equals min, open a parenthesis, and grab all of the numbers from the tech fund. Control Shift down, and grab them all. And the worst year that the tech fund had was a loss of a little over 51%. Fill handle over to get the energy fund's number, and the worst loss that that fund had was 54%, right on the dot. Next, I want the maximum return for the tech fund and the energy fund. So for the max return, I'm going to say it's equal to max, and I'm going to open a parenthesis. I'm going to grab all the numbers from the tech fund, B2 to B38, one more time, hit enter. The biggest return that the tech fund had during this 37-year period was 131.75%. That's a good year. Let's drag this on over to see what the energy fund, their best return was 52.02%. And kind of making some sense right here, that the fund with the greater deviation and the higher average would have the highest maximum return. But we wanted to get these numbers so we can do the z-score formula. What is the z-score formula? It's x minus x bar over s. Whereas x is the point that you're looking for, x bar is the mean of that fund's average, and s is its standard deviation. So we want the z-score of the minimum return for each fund. Well, that's going to be equal to, open a parenthesis, the minimum return for this fund, which is at 51.09% loss, minus the mean average of the fund, which was 17.7%, divided, close that parenthesis, divided by the standard deviation, which was 36.56. And it's always going to be the z-score formula. First number is the point you're looking for. Second number is the mean average, and the thing that's dividing both of them is the standard deviation of the sample. I'm going to hit enter here, and I'm going to come up with negative 1.88. So the minimum return for the tech fund during this 37-year period was 1.88 standard deviations below the average of 17.7. Let's do the same thing over here for the energy fund. We're still on the minimum return, so I'm going to click the minimum return minus the mean. I want both of those numbers in parentheses, so close that parenthesis, divided by the standard deviation. And I come up with negative 2.79. For the max, let's do the same thing here. Now the point that I want is the maximum return minus the mean, again in parentheses, divided by the standard deviation. That comes up to, I must have clicked something wrong there. Let me try it one more time. I make errors too. I want the maximum return of 131.75 minus the mean. Close that, divided by the standard deviation. There we go. The max z-score is 3.12, or 3.12 standard deviations above the mean average of 17.7. And let's do the same thing over here for energy. Equals the maximum return of 52.02 minus the mean, in parentheses, divided by the standard deviation. And that comes out to 1.83 above. So let's compare things. Well, firstly over here, when we just use the box and whisker automatic thing from Excel, it's telling us that there's a northern outlier right here. Is the same going to be true over here? Well, the key number for the z-score method is 3. Anything that is more than 3 standard deviations above mean or more than 3 standard deviations below mean should be an outlier. So using the Z formula is telling us that the tech fund's maximum return is also an outlier. Confirmed from this that that number is an outlier, hands down. But for energy, we got something else going on over here. Energy on the box and whisker has a dot underneath, which represents the outlier. So the box and whisker plot is telling us that the minimum return that we had over here of 54% should be considered an outlier. But over here, using the z-score methodology, that doesn't confirm it, because 2.79 standard deviations below mean is not a larger number than 3 standard deviations below mean are cut off for determining an outlier. So is it an outlier or is it not an outlier? Well, it depends on what methodology that you want to use. One thing you can always do is see what kind of difference it makes if you throw it out versus keeping it. So we know that the energy fund has a mean average of just over a 10% return if we leave that minimum in there. But what happens if I get rid of it? Well, let's go find that spot in here. And I see him right here on year 27. That's when the energy fund experienced the 54% loss, if you will. I want to take that guy out. I have a formula already in the cell that's calculating the mean average of all of these things. I can't type in 0 because then Excel will think that I had a 0% return, and I don't want to delete it. So the best thing you can do is just go to that cell and type in n/a for not applicable. And when you hit enter, it recalculates, leaving that number out. And now we can see that throwing that outlier out increases the mean average return of the energy fund to 11.8%. I can toggle back and forth up here with these buttons. 10% to 11.8% is a pretty big difference. If this is me and I'm trying to do an analysis on what I can reasonably expect to return on this energy fund, I've got a methodology that supports it. I've got information over here that tells me that this thing had a huge influence on what we're considering to be the average of the energy fund. I'm throwing it out. And I'm saying that the energy fund had a mean average return of 11.8% during the period.